The doors are closing. Just like in the theatre with the curtain, isn't it? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Chatham House. My name is Lindsay Hilton. I'm the international editor of Channel 4 News. I have rather fortuitously just been in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the reasons I'm very, very pleased to be here tonight amongst you and to hear what these people have to say. So I'm joined on the panel by Armida van Rij, who is the author of this report that some of you may have seen that's just come out from King's College, where she works. Security cooperation with Saudi Arabia, is it worth it for the UK? And so I'm sure many of you will be interested in reading this, and she will give you some details of how you can get hold of it, as well as speaking to it in her presentation. Madawi al-Rashid will be familiar to many of you. She's the editor of the recent book Salman's Legacy, and she is a professor at the LSE. And we're particularly happy to have May Yamani, who many of you will remember from here before, and who's, I think, been hiding from us. And we're very excited that after an absence, she's back. She is now at Mosul University, and she has just written another book, Cradle of Islam. Now, you may notice the person who isn't here. That is the gentleman from the Foreign Office, Neil Bush, and we're really sorry that he has had to drop out. I think it's really unfortunate because obviously discussing this issue of the relations between Saudi and the UK, we really wanted somebody from the Foreign Office to speak to that. But we will soldier on without him. And maybe, is there anybody from the Foreign Office in the audience? Oh, you're such cowards, aren't you? I know that some of you work for the Foreign Office, and then you're just, oh, you're the ones looking at your toes. But I hope that, I want there to be discussion. Normally, any of you who've seen me chair something before know that I'm very harsh with anybody who makes statements. And I will be harsh with anybody who makes long statements. But I think we do want a little bit of to and fro with the audience and people who have different views. That's what this is all about. This is all on the record. It's being live streamed. It's such an important time to be talking about the UK's relationship with Saudi Arabia. Of course, we know about all the change that's going on in Saudi Arabia, the social space widening, the political space narrowing, and the controversy about Britain continuing to sell arms to Saudi Arabia despite what's happening in Yemen. There was a statement from the Foreign Office last week saying that there should, in fact it was just a couple of days ago I think, saying that there should be an investigation into one of the attacks by Saudi aircraft which killed, I think, 40 children in a marketplace in Yemen. Spain, I noticed today, has announced that it is stopping sending some arms to Saudi Arabia now. So these are very critical issues. Britain, as it leaves the European Union, is looking to the other countries in the world. It obviously sees Saudi Arabia as an important partner, and it's also particularly important when we look at what's happening in the Middle East and the increased tension between Saudi and Iran, and also the Trump administration's policy of being so much on the Saudi side and against Iran and not doing anything to balance, which had been the policy of previous administrations. And so where does Britain fit into this new Middle East, into these new relationships between the West and Saudi Arabia? So those are some of the issues that I hope we're going to talk about. So let us start with Armida. Our speakers are all going to talk for about 7 minutes. I will be strict with them. And then we will throw it open. Armida, let me start with you.
Thank you, Lindsay. So as Lindsay just highlighted, it is a really important time to be talking about the UK-Saudi relationship. The context here in the UK is one of Brexit. It's something that the government is currently all consumed by. There are massive questions still pending over some of the UK's post-Brexit future bilateral relationships. At the same time, with the new Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, we've seen a more muscular foreign policy being conducted by Saudi Arabia, particularly with regards to Yemen, but there's also been other incidents such as detaining the Lebanese Prime Minister, the Qatari blockade, etc. We've also recently seen, which you alleged to just now, a UN report into allegations of war crimes in Yemen from the coalition, but it really concludes that all warring parties to the conflict are at fault, really, which are very different conclusions from the Joint Instance Assessment Team, which is the coalition-led assessment team. into its conduct in Yemen. So it's an important time to be talking about this relationship, but this relationship is also one of the UK's most controversial ones. So some of you in the audience may well think that it's absolutely crucial for the UK to engage with this country, that it is very important for UK national security. Whereas others of you may well think that actually it is fundamentally wrong for the UK to engage with such an autocratic government. So there are some difficult questions here. Now, we undertook a study where we sought to map the UK's objectives, thank you, where we sought to map the UK's stated objectives in its relationship with Saudi Arabia, and to assess to what extent that has given it any leverage or influence over Saudi foreign policy. That's one of the arguments we very often hear, that by engaging directly, you can export values, but also it gives you some leverage and influence over that government. Now, I will encourage you to read that report, of course, but the bottom line is that the UK isn't getting what it says it wants, and that's problematic at the moment. So I'd like to take you through 3 key points. The first is, what are those objectives? What does the UK say it wants? Secondly, what are the outcomes of the relationship? And then how can we go start addressing some of these issues? So first, what does the UK say it wants? What are its objectives? Now, as I'm sure some of you may very well know, the relationship between the UK and Saudi is very much based on 2 pillars, the security pillar and the trade relation, or the economic pillar. Security is very much justified around, well, counterterrorism is very important in this relationship. Intelligence sharing is absolutely crucial. We quite recently heard the new Foreign Sec, Jeremy Hunt, say that Saudi intelligence helps British bombs from not going off on British streets. So there are some areas there. Then the trade relation, and in particular with the oncome of Vision 2030, which I suspect some of you might talk about, which is essentially a series of economic reforms to reduce the Saudi government's reliance on oil. So with reducing that, the UK sees this as a potential for investment opportunities and wants to use this as an opportunity to grow British business in the country. Again, all of this is in the context of Brexit. You guessed it, of course. So Britain is looking to strengthen relations with non-EU allies, but that makes for this very difficult context. Now, the UK says that it wants to cooperate with Saudi for national security objectives and for trade relations. We looked at the extent to which that actually holds up. What we found is that actually there are very limited benefits and perhaps unexpected costs to the UK of this relationship. In terms of security, there are some security benefits. That is undoubtedly true. However, this is very much revealed in secrecy, and it is very hard to measure based on publicly available information. This is very different if you look at some of the UK's other bilateral relationships, for example, with the US or with France, where there's a lot less secrecy around some of the intricacies of that security relationship. In terms of economic benefits, that's actually also quite limited. And I know this is controversial, and I know that there's been a lot of work done around this, which we've all looked at. It's worth noting here that there's a difference between economic benefits at the national level or limited economic benefits at the national level and at the regional level. So while, for example, only 1% of UK economic output actually comes from the defence industrial sector, and that supports only 0.6% of jobs, BAE Systems, which is the main defence company in the UK and also the prime contractor for the Saudi government, supported 9,500 jobs in Lancashire, for example, which is a region with fairly high unemployment. So the gap between regional effects and national effects is different, and it's worth bearing that in mind. However, if we look at the trade relation, exports to Saudi Arabia from the UK only account for 1% of all of UK exports, and imports only of 0.3% in 2016. And then if we look at the arms trade, which is a central element of the UK-Saudi trade relationship, there was only 30 million for the Treasury resulting from arms sales in 2016, whereas the total revenue in 2016 for the Treasury was nearly 700 billion. So that means that the revenue for the Treasury was 0.004% in that given year, which is really quite minimal. And coming to the question of influence and leverage. From our analysis, there is very little publicly available evidence of any UK influence over Saudi Arabia. There is, however, a lot more evidence of Saudi influence over the UK, which would point to quite an unbalanced relationship, which is, again, problematic in this context. For example, quite recently, a Home Office report into terrorist financing was not published because of fears that that might reflect badly on Saudi, and we know that the Saudis pressed for that to not be published. In 2005, there was a Serious Fraud Office investigation into corruption allegations for Al Yamama, which is the biggest arms deal that the UK has ever done with the Saudi government. That was suppressed as well, which in 2008 the High Court actually found to be contrary to the law. Now, it's worth noting that that investigation was suppressed by then Prime Minister Tony Blair, stating specifically that he was concerned about the prospects of BAE Systems winning future contracts for Saudi Arabia. So that shows the close relation between the government and the defence companies here in the UK, sorry, on the one hand, and on the other hand, how concerned they are in terms of how that might affect their relationship with Saudi. And then there's a point of exporting values. So Theresa May has said repeatedly that by engaging with countries that may not share our values, we will export our values of liberal democracies, etc., and that eventually that message will come across and that will change the behavior of other states. Now, that hasn't really happened in Saudi, in case anyone hasn't noticed. So then there's the final question of reputational damage, and this is where it gets really difficult. So under Global Britain, which is the future foreign policy agenda, as far as we know it, Theresa May and Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson and all the others have repeatedly stated that they want the UK to be a defender and an upholder of the rules-based international order. But at the moment, the UK relationship with Saudi means that the UK is actually providing diplomatic coverage for Saudi's actions in Yemen in particular, for example, at the UN. So when a Dutch-led investigation or suggestion to have an international commission for inquiry into allegations of IHL violations, etc., in Yemen, that was suppressed by the P3, so the permanent members who are all arms exporting states, to Saudi, the Arab nations, and Saudi Arabia. That specific proposal would have seen the potential for recommendations to the International Criminal Court. Now, we know that eventually that was diluted to having an independent investigation by UN experts, which has just concluded. So that's still something, but it's a lot less strong than it would have been otherwise. There's also, if you compare some of the statements made by members of the UK government with regards to Saudi Arabia's actions or with regards to Houthi rebels in Yemen's actions, they're really quite different. So even recently, when there was a statement published by the UK government about the attacks on Yemen in August, all of them done by the Saudi-led coalition. So when it's saying about Saudi, what it's saying about Saudi is, about the coalition, sorry. We are deeply concerned, and we welcome that the coalition's announcement of regret and action to address the recommendations of that investigation. If we then look at what they say about the Houthi rebels, these attacks have targeted residential areas and shown no regard for civilian life. Yet we know that whether deliberately or not deliberately, that is at the moment still up in the air, the Saudi-led coalition has also targeted civilian targets in Yemen. So that's problematic. Then finally, other arms exporting countries like Belgium, like Germany, like Norway, have recently either started reviewing or have halted the stream of weapons from their countries to either Saudi, the UAE, or other warring parties in Yemen. Now, in the UK, we're not seeing any of that kind of discussion, and that's problematic. So we're seeing discussions in Parliament. MPs are very much picking or holding to account various members of the government, but we're not seeing this publicly in the rest of government, and that's a lack of thinking there. And again, this also shows, it makes you question, where's the UK on that front? And it really is a missed opportunity to show its commitment to that international rules-based order that it says it wants to uphold and defend and export to some extent. So that brings us to a real difficulty. And none of this is easy. I'm not trying to portray it as such. namely, which is what happens when you have perceived economic benefits, which are then contrasted with international obligations, because that's what some of this is, and a country's norms and values. And what the UK is doing stands pretty much opposed to what it says it wants to be doing. So how do you go about addressing this issue? How do you go about rebalancing that relationship? How do you go perhaps moving towards extracting some of that influence? Based on this research, we would recommend, first of all, that the UK conducts a robust review of its relationship with Saudi Arabia, and specifically of the costs and the benefits. I recognize that there is some information that they will have access to that we don't have access to because we're academics and no one ever shares anything with us. So I'm sure that there is something there. But at the moment, based on the publicly available information, it's not worth it. So you need to review the relationship. If you then find that the cost outweigh the benefits, you need to start thinking about what you're going to do about that. Secondly, we would recommend limiting and actually being more selective in the ways that the UK government engages with the Saudis. This needs to be based on a more nuanced understanding of the potential costs and benefits, so not just driven by economic interests, but also, what's the reputational damage for the UK? Does it affect our credibility on the international stage? Does it affect our credibility as an international actor? These are bigger questions that at the moment are not really being discussed. And finally, this all amounts, and it's again a shame that Neil Bush can't make it, the UK government needs to be more transparent about its relationship with Saudi Arabia. As mentioned before, it is far more transparent about some of its other bilateral relationships than it is with Saudi. Yet this is one that is so controversial. And of course, some of this is highly sensitive. But without the ability to quantify some of the leverage or some of the influence, really any efforts by the UK government to extol the importance of the relationship with Saudi Arabia are being undermined. So that's an issue as it stands at the moment.
Thank you very much, Armida. Can I just ask you one slightly technical question? The 30 million for the Treasury, that's from tax or what? Is that, how is that calculated?
Yeah, so that's from tax.
That's from the taxation. Okay, that's fine. Okay, there's a lot to think about there, but let us do that with the help of May Amani.
Thank you. So 2 kingdoms, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who have been close allies for the last few decades, since 1932 and the creation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now both kingdoms are going through a transition period. Global Britain, a new Saudi Arabia. Can this alliance be maintained in this moment of unprecedented dual relationship? I will focus on Saudi Arabia, Saudi domestic policies, Saudi foreign policies, and regional policies. Saudi domestic policies, since 2015, there are the economic and social reforms plans by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, specifically Vision 2030. That is, the aim is to wean off Saudi Arabia of its dependency on oil. Among the plans, there is a $500 billion city called Neom, serviced by robots. Positive press for futuristic, robotically run city, for cinemas, concerts, and women driving cars. The problem is some of the reforms are not implemented. For example, the shares in Aramco Oil Company have stalled. So to sell or not to sell. Women were driving cars, but at the same time, the women activists who have been campaigning for the right to drive cars have been detained. So reform or not to reform. arbitrary arrests of hundreds of activists, religious figures, prominent businessmen, and senior figures or members of the Al Saud ruling family. This creates cracks in the Saudi legitimacy. Meanwhile, the importance of oil has waned. Foreign policy since 2015 is seen as ambitious, assertive, aggressive, and alarming, as in the war on Yemen, the blockade of Qatar, and Canada last month. What dominates Saudi foreign policy is the perception of Iran as an existential threat and the fear of Iran's expansionism in the Middle East. Regional policy. In March 2015, Saudi Arabia declared Operation Decisive Storm. That is the war on Yemen that became one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes with no end in sight. The United Nations describes the war on Yemen as the worst war since World War II. $200 billion have been spent on the war with no achievement. The UK, together with the US and France, are the main suppliers of arms. Meanwhile, Saudi hegemonic ambitions have created, in the Arabian Peninsula, have created cracks and a crisis in the region. The Gulf Cooperation Council that was created in 1981 to counter the power of Iran in the region has fractured with the economic and political war on Qatar. So now there are the trio, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, and also the quartet, the Arab quartet, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. Oil money has been used as soft power. So to have the dominance of Saudi Arabia in the region, but also to buy the subservience, submission, and silence of the Saudi people. Now, there isn't the abundance of oil money. So two kingdoms, allies in a period of transition, the UK in search of a post-Brexit identity, Saudi Arabia moving into a unprecedented volatile state or direction. So the questions are, can this close relationship be maintained, unchanged? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Omani. And finally, let's go to Madawi Al-Rashid for your remarks.
Thank you. I'm going to start this by just mentioning how far the Saudi regime could go on the streets of Britain. In the front row here, we have a gentleman, a Saudi in exile, called Ghanem al-Masarir. Over the weekend, he was attacked by Saudis who recognized him. Why was he attacked? He has a YouTube channel, and The Economist actually wrote an article about him. He uses satire and comedy in order to undermine what he believes is an authoritarian, repressive regime. So, Ghanem, you could stand up and show them where you were punched in the face. This goes on the streets of Britain.
I think I have to, as a journalist, I have to come in here and say, we can't say exactly who hit him.
No,
you
we
don't
can't.
know
But
if
the
they were
police-
connected
the
with the
police
government
had
in any
been-
way.
the police
There may
had
have
been
been
notified.
other people who thought he wasn't funny. I just want to say we have to be a little bit careful about
Yes.
leaping to conclusions.
Well, they did admit, if you watch the YouTube in Arabic, and you'll see what those thugs had said to him. Anyway, we'll leave it there. So there are well-rehearsed arguments against the continuation of this alliance that had become sacrosanct between Britain and Saudi Arabia. As May mentioned, this relationship goes before 1932. In fact, it started early in the 20th century, and it has evolved. In a way, I sense when you talk to British officials, and unfortunately we don't have one on the panel, that it is a relationship that is cherished, that remains as a symbol of a distant British past. And here I specifically refer to the imperial colonial history of Britain in the Middle East. There are arguments against the continuation of this unequivocal and unconditional support that the British governments, successive British governments, had given Saudi Arabia over the years. Of course, there is the arms sales that had become more controversial, and thanks to British civil society, these are now talked about in Britain itself. There's also the historical association between Saudi Arabia and radical forms of Islam that Britain had suffered from, but we don't want to talk about that now because Saudi Arabia is fostering and developing moderate Muslims. So there's also the problem of Saudi exiles, students and others who find themselves in Britain, who cannot go back to Saudi Arabia simply because they have tweeted or they had mentioned a critical opinion against the Saudi regime. All that is well rehearsed and we know. And here we are very realistic. I do not require or demand that Britain sanction Saudi Arabia or shun Saudi Arabia on the basis that, well, this is a dictatorship or a repressive regime. On this logic, if we follow it, then Britain may not have anybody to talk to in the Arab world. And therefore, I'm very realistic in what one expects from a democratically elected government like the British government when it deals with Saudi Arabia. So between the unconditional support and the extreme sanctioning of Saudi Arabia or being critical of Saudi Arabia, there must be a middle way. And the middle way goes too far. There is one assumption that the constructive engagement of the British government with a regime like Saudi Arabia would lead to reforming that regime, exporting the values of Britain, especially those related to democracy and human rights, and also the international norms and values. As you mentioned in your report, we don't have evidence of this, that Britain had used its importance and critical importance for Saudi projects, whether they are economic or educational, in order to pressurize the Saudi government. Successive British governments think that anything that goes in Saudi Arabia is their business. Under international law, governments are not meant to interfere in the domestic affairs of other countries. But both countries, Saudi Arabia and Britain, do. And Saudi Arabia regionally had moved from diplomacy to actually aggressive behavior in turning the tide against democracy. And its role in the last years had been very, very destructive of the democratic civil society in the Arab world, in the neighborhood, in places like Bahrain, in Yemen, which precipitated a humanitarian crisis, in Egypt, when an elected government was toppled because of Saudi UAE money, supporting the return of the military to power, trying to subvert the nascent democratic experiment in Tunisia, undermining the survival of the Jordanian regime by cutting off subsidies and help, and also undermining the fragile peace that persists in Lebanon against all odds by forcing or instigating a kind of resignation by the prime minister to create more chaos in Lebanon. So the logic of the British government that we have no choice but to support the Saudi regime, not only for the domestic security of Saudi Arabia, but also for the region, proves to be illogical and also doesn't hold against any substantial evidence. We find that the collapse of the democratic moment in 2011 in the Arab world was actually a direct result of the intervention of certain monarchies in the region that saw the threatening moment. And this moment was extremely threatening because it was a grassroots movement that had no ideological affiliation with the radical Islamist or the moderate Islamist or the left or anybody apart from people wanting a change of the regimes that had oppressed them, that had plundered their wealth as a result of corruption, and so on and so forth. So that historical moment was so threatening, and what we are seeing in Saudi Arabia is an attempt to reverse that. And unfortunately, Britain had put its weight against that. Even when Saudi Arabia mentions that, well, we want you to put this group on a terrorist list, Britain welcomes the suggestion, starts an investigation. Then we have a report that the British government sits on for months and months and months because they do not want to offend Saudi Arabia. The other occasion that you mentioned about the British government succumbing to pressure. So we're not here talking about the old colonial relationship that I started my discussion with, but we are talking here about a government that is repressive, that is authoritarian, that blackmails Western government. It sees itself as indispensable for our survival in Britain. But we don't have the evidence. As you mentioned, the employment figure in the arms trade industry is actually insignificant. The money could be found elsewhere. And the argument that we need in Britain, Saudi Arabia, because its collapse will create chaos in the region. I am not sure what more chaos we can witness in the region than the havoc that was created in place like Yemen, in Egypt, where thousands of people are behind bars facing execution. Today, Saudi public prosecutor recommended that one of the clerics in Saudi Arabia, Salman al-Ouda, be executed. And there are 37 charges. Without the rule of law, without open courts, we cannot actually take these accusations and charges at face value. But Britain continues to support Saudi Arabia. And when they execute people, they claim that, well, it is not up to us. I do remember one incident where a particular MP from a particular political party in Britain talked to me and May, because we were giving a talk on human rights at the House of Parliament. And he talked to us. What are you doing here, women, ladies, tarnishing the reputation of your country and asking us to change our policy towards this regime? So basically, we are not trusted as full citizens, as full British citizens in Britain, although we have been British for decades, and also we're regarded as agents of foreign Western government by our own government. So we're actually in between. We're not listened to in Britain, and we're accused of treason in Saudi Arabia. But the fact is that both of us are here because we can't go back to Saudi Arabia. We'll be on the death row, like Sheikh Salman al-Ouda and thousands of other people. Recently, a woman from the Eastern Province was put on with the same recommendation that the public prosecutor recommended. She is regarded as a traitor, and she will be executed. So basically,
ask you to wind
I
up.
just want to conclude by mentioning one important point, that the argument that Britain uses to continue its relationship with Saudi Arabia as it is, and I mean the unconditional support, is futile. The Saudi regime is imploding from within. Don't expect a mass revolt Egyptian style. It is going to implode from within. All the evidence is there, but people refuse to see it. Today, there are thousands of people in Saudi prisons. They have been there since Mohammed bin Salman came to power. Doesn't mean that the prisons were empty before. They were full already. But this situation is unsustainable. A new so-called reformer cannot rule, cannot create moderate Muslims when he puts all the clerics in prison and call them radical. If you want to create moderate Islam, you need to have an open space. You need to have a room like this where people come together and debate what moderate Islam is about. They need to have a forum. But Britain continues to support this regime and buying the rhetoric and the PR campaign that had come, at least in public. I'm sure if we talk privately to people in the Foreign Office and in government, they really don't believe the rhetoric. I'm sure they don't, because they're intelligent people there. And but it is a pragmatic position that is unsustainable, and it will implicate Britain in the future in the chaos that Mohammed bin Salman or any other prince has already put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I'm in a difficult situation because I now want to turn to the chap from the Foreign Office. But in his absence, I'm just going to put a couple of the points that have been put to me by when I've spoken to British diplomats in the last few months, and I have talked to a few on Saudi Arabia, just to make a few counterpoints to add to the discussion. One is that there has been a massive social opening up in Saudi Arabia. And I don't think anybody is talking about a political opening up, but socially it is hugely different. And this is about people being able to go and see films. This is about girls and boys, men and women mixing. When I was there a few months ago, I went to the circus. And you know what? It was hard to grudge the joy on the face of those children who'd never been allowed to go to the circus before. It was pretty good. And musicians who previously had been told they couldn't do anything, who would have their instruments smashed, well, now they're being supported to make music, all kinds of different music. So I think that's one of the things that our absent friend might talk about. I think another thing our absent friend might talk about is to say that in terms of reputation and so on, that Britain has to work with its allies, which means America and France. And that Britain, I think they would say, it always works as a partner with America when it comes to Saudi Arabia. And Britain has a different policy on Iran. And if it just takes a totally different policy from the Americans on both Saudi Arabia and Iran, that is not going to work and is not going to help them influence the policy as they would like it to be. I'm sure they would also say, or mean if they didn't say, that if they didn't sell the weapons, the French would, because that's what they always say. And I think that they would say that they feel that they do have an influence and that the social opening up is evidence of that influence, and that this, because Mohammed bin Salman is so young and because he is so popular, very popular amongst young Saudis and many other Saudis as well, and because of the women driving and so on, that this is evidence that this relationship over the years has borne some fruit. So that's my attempt at saying what I think they might have said, with a few bits of my own. And I think we should now throw open. Is there anybody here, first of all, before we go to general questions, is there anybody here who is involved directly in trade with Saudi Arabia who would like to say something? Oh, you are always so shy. Anybody from the Saudi embassy who would like to say anything? Well, how can we have an open debate if you won't talk? If you won't talk, we can't debate. And that's a fact, right? So I think the people who are here who would want to make those points should make them. Otherwise, you have no right to complain if they're not made. Yep? Is that fair? Yes. We go to the lady here.
My name is Aisha Siddiqa.
Hang on, Aisha. We're giving you the microphone.
Yeah, my name is Aisha Siddiqa from SOAS. I think I'll add to the question which was asked earlier. How do you convince a world which can't be bothered about human rights at the moment, especially the West? I mean, I went to Washington and Mohammed bin Salman is hugely popular. How do you present a picture which says, on the one hand, that there is a social change in Saudi Arabia, but to say that no, human rights is important, and therefore it should be weighed as well, and that what is going to happen? I mean, the story that you're telling about internal implosion is something which is not sinking in. And very briefly, to the author of the report, would you say there needs to be a review of the relationship with Saudi Arabia, a review of how Britain makes its foreign policy? Because it's not just Saudi Arabia, with other countries. I come from Pakistan. And Britain has very good relations with the Pakistani military at the cost of the people there. And in
Okay,
both...
I think that's fine. Thanks for those points. I'm going to take a couple more points. Anything from over here? Oh, what a quiet audience. I wonder why. Yes, we've got somebody there. Yeah.
Lewis Brooks from Safer World. The UK government often sort of has this line about that if they halted arms sales, it would have no impact on Saudi Arabia or the conflict in Yemen. And I was wondering whether the author of the report or other panelists had any kind of take on that in light of the report's findings.
There would be no impact if we halted arms sales. Anybody from over this side want to make anything? I'll come to you at the front, sir. Yeah, we're coming to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ali Mohammed. I'm from Bahrain. So my first question is to Armeda. How do you find the lack of policy in Saudi Arabia, and how is that giving the Saudi government the space to commit all of those violations? And the second question is to Dr. Madawi. How do you find the impact of the Islamic culture on that policy making in the future? Thank you.
Impact on policy making in the future. I didn't quite understand the first question. Could you try and explain it to me again?
All right, so the first question is, we all know that there is a lack of policy in Saudi Arabia. There is no clear policy about cybercrime because basically my background is IT.
Yes.
So when I researched in cybercrime, I noticed that there is no policy about cybercrime, and most of the Arabian or GCC countries use those laws to actually restrict the freedom of expression.
Yes.
And they have been doing it for so long. So I was wondering, how do you find this from Armeda point?
And sort of lack
and
of
then
policy
the impact
formulation.
of the Islamic culture on further policy making in the future.
Yeah, and on Islamic culture and policy. But let's get a few comments on that. Don't know which one. Do you want to take any of those?
Yes, so I'll start with review of the relationship with Saudi or review of the UK's foreign policy as a whole. I think that's actually a really good question, and I think it should definitely be the latter. I think there's this bigger question, especially now, where, in part because of Brexit, the UK government has this opportunity to redesign and carve out the space that it wants the UK to play on the international stage. That involves making some quite difficult decisions around what does it want to do on the international stage, what kind of country does it want to be, who does it want to do this with, how's it going to pay for this? And those are some really tough decisions. And again, we're not seeing that sort of debate or thinking in government at the moment. But I think that you're absolutely right. And that also means that, I mean, the UK government can't say that it's a defender and upholder of a rules-based international order and then do some of this as we've discussed before. So it needs to decide which way it's going to be, and before it tries to sort of export certain values, look at itself and think, okay, but are we doing this?
What about the issue about, which a gentleman from Safer World made, that the British often say, well, it wouldn't make any difference if we didn't send them the weapons, because, you know, France or whoever would fill the gap.
Yeah. So I'd flip that on its head a little bit and say, well, what you often say is well, what you often hear, if we don't sell weapons, then, you know, they'll go to somewhere else. I think in terms of the context in Yemen specifically, the argument very often goes, well, because we engage directly, we can teach them and we can train the Saudi Air Force.
Many British officers who have served there would say that, you know, that's what they do.
But I think it is, I mean, perhaps that's optimistic, but it is one of those things that if you were to start drawing a line, and if you can get some of your allies on board with that, such as the US, then perhaps that can actually have an impact. And also, I mean, there's something around the long lead times for procurement of some of these issues. So, I mean, the procurement cycles are incredibly long. The UK, for example, and some of these systems aren't interchangeable. So when you're talking about a weapon system, you're talking about a system of a system. So the UK produces 81 millimeter mortars, whereas China produces 82 millimeter mortars. These aren't always interchangeable, and that you can't always fit different bits and pieces of equipment on different bits of equipment produced by someone else. So that's worth bearing in mind as well.
Yeah. Okay. May, did you want to take any of this? Can I ask you maybe about there being actually sort of no policy in a sense in Saudi Arabia, that there is no kind of real policy-making structure, as it were? Do you perceive that?
I would first just make a reminder when you mentioned the fact that there are cinemas today.
Yes.
There were cinemas since 1965. I used to go to cinema in Jeddah.
Yes.
So it's not the first time. And the music and all this was traditional. Maqamat al-Hijaz, they were all the traditional that had been abruptly stopped and suppressed.
And they have come back up again.
But what is interesting is that in many countries in the West and the PR, this cosmetic thing is like, you know, we have concerts, we have pop music. That is just the superficial level of reform.
Not to the young people I met in Jeddah and in Riyadh a couple of months ago. They didn't see it as superficial. They thought it was important in their lives.
Yes, it's, but as Madawi is saying, I think that the fact that there are so many detentions and are different people, whether it is in the eastern province who are suppressed and repressed, marginalized because they're Shia, or the other, there are regions. So it is a very selective policy of reform in the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Madawi, did you want to take any of these questions?
I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. I mean, by focusing only on arms sale, we miss an important dimension to the military relationship. There are operational rooms where the military participates, and this has been reported in the war on Yemen. So it's not basically selling a missile here or a typhoon there. It's about British defense personnel being on the ground, working with the Saudis. They claim that they are observers, and none of us have access to these rooms. But to go back to your point about the secrecy, why is this relationship secret? Frankly, Britain prefers to deal with princes when it comes to selling arms, because they don't want a national elected government, a democratic government in Saudi Arabia that would vet contracts, that would vote on certain contracts, reject some and accept others, like what happens in Kuwait. I would say
that they do sell weapons to many countries,
yes,
which are democracies.
But there are no debates.
They don't only sell weapons to countries without parliamentary scrutiny.
Absolutely,
and so that
but
might be
there's
a
no
little bit
debate
unfair.
in Saudi Arabia. Nobody's going to challenge any kind of contract. And if there is a princely reshuffle, then the British government will be at a loss. Who should we deal with? Well, it used to be Bandar bin Sultan or somebody else, but now who is our man in Riyadh who we can actually communicate with and sell the arms? So it's a personalized relationship, unlike the relationship of the British government with other government, whether
Let me put you onto the question that this gentleman was
asking. The other point about the opening up of the social sphere. And if we're talking about UK-Saudi relationship, I don't think having a cinema in Saudi Arabia is a result of transferring British values to Saudi Arabia. It is actually,
not yours.
But it is important to talk about the so-called reforms and what kind of reforms. You call them cosmetic, non-reforms, reforms, what the Saudi people. If you have a 20 million people, starved of any personal freedom. The moment you give them a little opening, of course they're going to enjoy it. But of course it's a distraction. So you go to the circus, and we know from our academic background what the relationship between the circus and repressive governments. In fact, why the circus is so important. It was so important in the Soviet Union because people would imagine, would hallucinate, would aspire toward the unrealistic, and it's a distraction. And you know, we could work on that in an academic, in a classroom.
I want you to answer this gentleman about the Islamic culture and policy making.
Yes.
Can you respond to that?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean, that the Islamic culture will influence Saudi foreign policy. Saudi foreign policy is godless, right? It is based on national interest, and not only the national interest of the Saudis, but the interest of a clique that is self-sustaining, that monopolizes power, that does not allow anybody to give any opinion about how foreign policy should be conducted. And therefore, Islam shouldn't be part of the conversation.
But I think one of the interesting things, that I got this from your book, one of the essays in your book, about the rise of nationalism as an ideology,
yes,
as opposed to Islam as an ideology, which is an interesting move or a change that some people are seeing in Saudi Arabia. I think
Yes,
that is
well,
quite
popular nationalism. I mean,
Yes.
it is not only a Saudi phenomenon, it's become a global phenomenon.
is,
And
yes.
populist leaders, I mean, Brexit itself was part of the populism that plays on people's fears, on unemployment, on apprehension about their future, and it is very popular. So Mohammed bin Salman had captured the souls of the youth in the country, which is the majority cohort, by introducing cinema, by having this kind of openness. But there is a dark side to that.
Which you have explained to us.
Yes.
Let's go to the back. We've got three at the back there. That gentleman just next to you there.
Thank you very much. I'm Alexander Naffer. I'm a member at Chatham House. I just wanted to ask, whilst I think you've very well articulated the cost-benefit analysis of the relationship with Saudi Arabia as it currently stands, I'd be interested to know how much analysis you've done of the future economic benefits that have been touted by many representatives of the government and indeed people from the business community. Just for example, off the top of my head, I was reading about how the advent of labor reforms in Saudi Arabia will mean that private schools are going to be much more important, and I read that Pearson has just secured a big contract there. Additionally, the reform of capital markets infrastructure, whilst the Saudi Aramco IPO has been postponed, who's to say that other British financial advisory businesses won't be very keen to see greater strength. I just wonder how much of your analysis looks at the potential benefits of what the new Saudi Arabia is going to look like, rather than, as you very well articulated, what Saudi Arabia is like now. So that's my question.
That's very good. We've got another two at the back there. These two gentlemen, yes, that one, and then this one, yeah.
Hello, my name's Richard Stanforth. I'm from Oxfam, and I actually met the Foreign Office last week. And one of the things that we're actually doing tomorrow is putting out a press release detailing some of the attacks that we've seen over the last month and some of the figures behind that. And we were highlighting some of the attacks on our own infrastructure. Sorry?
Your question?
And my question is basically the point I made to the Foreign Office, that we actually see in the US, President Trump has called for a ceasefire. The US government has come out very strongly recently about the attacks on water infrastructure. And I wonder if you can comment on the US versus UK relationship with Saudi. The US actually seems to be taking a stronger position at the moment.
You're wondering if the US is taking a stronger position
I mean, basically,
than the UK?
I don't know
Okay,
comment.
Thank you very much. And there was a gentleman just in front, yes.
Thank you very much. And first of all, my name's Neil Morpar. I'm from the Oxford Research Group, and I want to thank Armida for this piece of research that she's done on behalf of us. So thank you very much. My question is, do you think that part of the problem with sort of selling the Saudi-UK relationship is that the government hasn't been particularly transparent about that relationship, and perhaps if it had been more transparent about its role in the Riyadh's targeting rooms, then that the arms sales wouldn't then have become a political issue?
Yeah, the transparency. Okay, should we go in the backwards? Actually, I'm quite interested, May, in your view on this issue about whether you think that actually the US has been more critical than the UK or more questioning when it comes to arms sales and what's been happening in Yemen and so on. Do you see that at all?
Well, we know that President Trump has revived the importance of the U.S. relation with Saudi Arabia. So if you think of what are the foundations of or pillars of legitimacy of Saudi Arabia, that is relationship with the U.S., with the United States, oil money, unity of the royal family, and their persuasive identity, and back to Islam here. But I don't know whether this unpredictable, again, what is happening with their relationship with the US. I don't have a clear, I don't know if anyone here has
they
a
have
clear...
there is something which was said recently where they have actually started to question the behavior, the Saudi behavior in Yemen and the targeting and so on, and that's come under through Congress, I think, which I don't think we have seen.
The only condemnation has been the United Nations declarations.
Future economic benefit, Armida, that's quite an interesting concept, isn't it? Because as Saudi diversifies, yes, education, all sorts of other things might come up. Did you look at that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we know that Saudi is looking to increase its FDI from, I think it's 3.8% to 5.7% by 2030. Within that package, there will, of course, be opportunities for British business. We also know, however, focusing on the sort of arms trade element of it, that they're looking to build their domestic defense industry, and that they want to, by 2030, again, procure over 50% of their budget, use that on procuring from domestic defense industries rather than foreign companies, which is up from 2% in 2016. So in terms of the arms trade relationship side of it, that will change. At the moment, the UK exports, 48% of UK exports go to Saudi Arabia. That's not sustainable. There is a question of whether in the interim term there will be opportunities for the UK to help build its domestic defense industry, but I think the Saudis are currently talking to Russia about that, which the UK is delighted about.
But there's gratitude for you.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about the other things? Because one of the things that certainly British diplomats talk about a lot is exactly what the gentleman there was talking about, that the future opportunities of non-defence related things because of the building of the new city, which May mentioned, and the whole opening up of the economy and the social space.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting question, but at the moment, Vision 2030 is still, I mean, we've seen some wonderful PR campaigns, but it's still
a slightly
pending.
blurred vision still.
It's still slightly blurred, and we haven't actually seen a lot coming out of it yet in terms of whether it's actually feasible economically. So to answer your question very directly, it focused very much on the current situation, but with the acknowledgement that things will change, particularly in that defence sphere.
Yeah. Transparency. I think, Madawi, that transparency, which the gentleman there mentioned, I think that is something which is very key for you, isn't it?
When we actually kept, we are not told about these kind of secret deals. We only hear in the press. But I mean, it is important if you have a country that is you're dealing with. There is a lot of trade flow, a lot of future potential. That this has to be in the open. Of course, we don't want to know the secret sort of correspondence because future historians will have to look at that, and sometimes they're shocked. I mean, some of us who had worked in British archives about things in 30 years ago, you discover the reality of the relationship. But even then, there are certain things that are declassified. They're not classified.
So you're always going to have some need for secrecy. We're always going to have
some secret dealing and wheeling, but it's important as a starting point to have an open debate about this relationship.
If I can just add to that, I think at the moment there was a poll done in 2016 on how the UK public feels about the relationship with Saudi. And I think something like 39% said that Saudi should be treated as an enemy versus 37% said that Saudi should be treated as an ally. So public support for the relationship with Saudi is very low in 2016. I'm not aware of a poll that's been done since.
But that might change. That might, it would be interesting to do that poll in a couple of years' time if MBS stays on. And because with all the things about women driving and, you know, all of these things, which I think would be seen by many people in the UK as positive outcomes and positive change.
And I don't know to
that
what
might
extent
or might not change.
That low, those low numbers are based around the lack of transparency. I don't know that, but it's just worth
right. Now we are sadly coming to an end because I can look up there and I've been told that my job is to stop this at 7 on the dot. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm very sorry not to take everybody's questions. And I'm sorry about the people who had very interesting things to say but who haven't said them, because I know you're out there. But I would like to thank our panel very much. And I would not like to thank the Foreign Office for not showing up. And I would like to thank Chatham House for affording us this opportunity. Thank you very much.